Welcome friends to my channel Family Tutorials. Today we are going to understand a cardiac condition which is known as congestive heart failure. It is a condition of the failing of the pumping capacity of the heart, and that is why there would be the more retention of the blood in the heart and accumulation of the fluid in the body. There are other complications too that we will understand later in other parts. In this particular video, we are going to focus on how the condition of the congestive heart failure arises. What is the exact mechanism? What is the exact pathogenesis? So, before we really understand the pathophysiology of congestive heart failure, we need to understand the physiology and the very important law or concept which helps us, that is Frank-Starling's law. It is a very basic fundamental phenomena. See, we are having heart having the four chambers, and one of the most important chamber, that is the left ventricle. Left ventricle, that is the ultimate chamber which forces blood towards the body region, which is pumping the blood. Okay, so that is the most important region. So our discussion will be in the context of what? Left ventricle, right? Now it is very general phenomena. If you pour more blood into the left ventricle, the size of the left ventricle increases, and that will increase what? Contractility of the wall of the left ventricle. So what this particular law says, volume of ventricle is proportional to the contractility of the heart wall, or precisely ventricular wall. So more you pour blood into the ventricle, more would be the contractility, and thus more would be the pumping of the heart generates. So this is what Frank-Starling's law. Now we will understand this particular graph, and before we understand this particular graph, we will understand this particular term, EDV and SV. What is EDV? End diastolic volume. Before the heart contracts, or precisely before the ventricle contracts, whatever the blood inside into the ventricle, that is known as what? End diastolic volume. Okay, before the contraction of the ventricle, whatever the blood available in the ventricle, that is known as what? End diastolic volume. Now it is very logical. If the blood inside the ventricle is more would be the contractility. So now we will understand the term stroke volume. That is a very simple term. Stroke volume, that is the pumping of the blood from the left ventricle in one beat. Once again, stroke volume, that is the pumping of the blood from the left ventricle in one particular beat. That is known as what? Stroke volume. So it is very logical. If you have more end diastolic volume in the ventricle, more would be the contractility, and that is why more would be the stroke volume generated. So that is the basic phenomena we need to understand. Now we will try to understand with some values. Say for example, left ventricle contains of 140 ml of the blood. This is just for the analogy example. Left ventricle is having 140 ml of the blood before the contraction. So it is said as what? End diastolic volume. With this end diastolic volume, it is able to create 70 ml of the stroke volume. With this 140 of the end diastolic volume, the left ventricle able to create what? 70 ml of the stroke volume. This is like occurring in the general healthy heart. Okay. Almost around 50% of the ejection occurs. See, 140, 70, it is 50%, right? Now you increase the end diastolic volume from 140, we are focusing here, from 140, we are increasing the end diastolic volume 200, right? So as the end diastolic volume increases, see the graph, green colored normal graph, the stroke volume also increases about 50% of the end diastolic volume, and thus it is what? 100 ml. So this is occurring in the normal heart, but we need to understand at one particular level, 200 you can reach to 220, then 300, then whatever the end diastolic volume is occurring, the stroke volume remains almost same. At one particular condition, this graph reaches to the plateau level. because there is a limitation of the heart. Heart can contract up to certain particular limit. There is some optimum limit. Okay, now what happened in this congestive heart failure patient? See, if the end diastolic volume is 140, see the red line. The stroke volume is not 70 but below to the 70. It can be near to the 30 or 40. The volume is there but heart is not able to contract, and that is why there would be no generation of what? Stroke volume. If the end diastolic volume rises 200, the stroke volume is not rising significantly. It is still below the 70. So this is the condition of congestive heart failure, and on the basis of that, the principle to be understood, that is Frank-Starling's law. Okay, so this is like the introduction. Now we will try to understand the pathogenesis. The core phenomena, underlying phenomena, that is recurrent IHD. Recurrent means it is occurring very continuously. There are multiple episodes of the condition. IHD, ischemic heart disease. The heart is not provided with the enough amount of the blood. The heart major wall, that is myocardium, is insufficient of the blood, and the conditions are angina pectoris and myocardial infarction. So due to this condition, there would be the infarction, means necrosis of the cell of the heart, especially myocardium, and that will lead to what? Myocardium, that is the muscle layer. So muscle layers are getting died, necrotized. What happens? The contractility will decrease. So heart contractility gets decreased, and ultimately the cardiac pumping decreases. So we can say the stroke volume decreases. Please pay attention. Stroke volume decreases. Stroke volume, once again, it is what? Pumping of the blood per bit. But if we say pumping of the blood per minute, it can be considered as what? Cardiac output. So here, in this particular cardiac conditions like ischemic heart disease, the cardiac output decreases. So this is the problem. Now, body will try to recompensate, body will try to manage this all problems. So what body does? Let's understand. The core phenomena is what? Cardiac output decreases. Now what happened? Cardiac output is decreasing, so body are having some baroreceptors, some sensors which identify that. So heart is providing blood to the brain. Heart is providing blood to the brain with the help of one of the major arteries, that is the carotid artery. So carotid artery is located somewhere in the neck region, and in the neck region the carotid artery is getting bifurcated into internal arteries. On the level of that bifurcation of the carotid artery, one particular area occurs, that is carotid sinus. This carotid sinus is located here, and it is highly sensitive. So if there is a less cardiac output, there would be less filling of the carotid sinus with the blood, and it is getting sensitized. Now it is innervated with particular nerve. That nerve is known as cranial nerve. That nerve is known as cranial nerve. Number is 9. Another name of that particular nerve, that is glossopharyngeal nerve. Please note that. Glossopharyngeal nerve. Now this nerve is directly connected with the brain. See the area, medulla oblongata. The very specific area is tractus solitary, nucleus tractus solitary, but the major area, that is medulla oblongata. So this area is getting stimulated, and this particular area activates sympathetic nervous system. Medulla oblongata activates sympathetic nervous system and will release what? Sympathetic flow. Sympathetic flow once again transfer to the heart. Sympathetic flow transfer to the heart, and it is doing two tasks. One is it activates the SA node in the heart and increases the heart rate. And also it increases ventricular contractility. And by these two actions, increases the heart rate and increasing the ventricular contractility, it increases the stroke volume and thus the cardiac output. So this is how your compensated cardiac output is managed somewhat. Okay, so that is one phenomenon. What happens next, or simultaneously rather we can say, as the cardiac output decreases, there would be the activation of the kidney through juxtaglomerular cells which are located in the afferent arterioles, and they will activate the RAAS system, very important system, Renin-Angiotensin-Aldosterone System. And through this activation, we are having the activation of major two components, aldosterone and angiotensin 2. Aldosterone and angiotensin 2. What they do? Aldosterone is responsible for, pay attention, aldosterone is responsible for increasing blood volume. It is responsible for increasing what? Blood volume. Pay attention. If the blood volume increases, obviously more volume will be there in the ventricle as per the Frank-Starling law, right? And as the volume increases, the contractility of the heart increases, and as contractility increases, more stroke volume and more cardiac output. So this is how, with the help of the RAAS system, we can avail the cardiac output, desired cardiac output. Okay, next is angiotensin 2. Angiotensin 2 is responsible for the vasoconstriction. So by that, the blood pressure increases. So as the blood pressure increases, there would be more volume in the ventricle, and that is why once again the contractility increases and stroke volume and cardiac output, stroke volume and cardiac output increases. So this is how RAAS system helps to avail desired cardiac output. So that is very good thing, right? But what happens next? Now focus on the RAAS system and one of the important component, that is angiotensin 2. Angiotensin 2 is responsible for two phenomena, venocontraction and arterial contraction. Contraction of the vessels and contraction of the arteries and arterioles. And here we are having the activation of the sympathetic nervous system also, and sympathetic nervous system also responsible for direct constriction rather you can say, of the blood vessels and arteries. Now focus well, okay? As first we will focus on the venoconstriction. So blood vessels, those blood vessels which are pulling back the blood towards the heart, that is said as blood vessels. Okay, so as there would be the more constriction of the blood vessels, there would be the more venous return, more blood is coming towards the heart, and that will lead to what? Increase in the radius of the heart. That will increase the radius of the heart because more blood is coming towards the heart. So that is one phenomena. So remember well, venoconstriction lead to venous return rise and ultimately lead to rise in the radius of the heart, especially left ventricle. Okay, this side, as the arterial constriction occurs, what happens? Focus here please. We are having left ventricle, and followed by the left ventricle we are having artery and arteriolar system. So as the artery and arteriolar are getting more constricted, left ventricle has to work more to provide blood down, to pump the blood, and that is why left ventricle is getting unable to transfer the blood into the arteries because of their over-constriction or because of their resistance, and that is why more amount of the blood remain in the left ventricle, that ultimately increases the end diastolic volume. Once again, as the resistance increases, end diastolic volume increases. Now, what happens next? To understand that, we have to understand the last law, that is Laplace law. Focus here please. Pressure is proportional to tension divided by radius. So whatever the pressure is being provided by the wall of the left ventricle is proportional to the tension arises in the wall of the left ventricle and radius of the left ventricle. Now what happens here? Due to over venous return, more filling of the heart, so radius increases. Please focus here. As the radius increases, as it is inversely proportional, the pressure decreases. Also, the tension of the heart wall is already low. Because of this, don't forget this. We are having the condition of infarction. We are having the condition of the low contractility. So obviously the tension which is being generated by the heart wall is already very low, and that is why due to these two components, the pressure which is generated by the heart wall is very low. Okay, and ultimately what happens? the end diastolic volume is getting increase and increase. End diastolic volume is getting increase and increase. That is why the radius of the heart is getting increase and increase. But due to the insufficiency of the wall, low contractility of the wall, due to the low tension of the heart wall, the pressure doesn't arises, pressure doesn't generate, and that is why the heart is getting larger and larger, and the stroke volume is getting low and low, and very otherwise it is very low. Okay, so that is the entire phenomena. So ultimately what happens due to this condition, the cardiac filling increases, radius increases, there are some inflammatory markers also involved. Even angiotensin 2, do remember, angiotensin 2 of the RAAS system is also responsible for the inflammation and growth, and these all factors lead to fibrosis of the heart wall, and heart is becoming larger and larger, that is known as cardiomegaly. And ultimately, there are some permanent structural morphological changes occur in the heart, that is known as what? Cardiac remodeling. So heart is getting very large, cardiomegaly with fibrosis, and that condition happens for long period of time. So this is like a permanent condition, and patient has to be dependent on the medications only. Okay, so this is all about the congestive heart failure. You have to understand the Frank-Starling law, the phenomena of recurrent IHD. Okay, what happened, how the contractility decreases. Then when cardiac output decreases, which are the compensatory mechanisms? There are two. One is by carotid sinus and another is by RAAS system. These two conditions are very good, but there are some side effects, that is veno and arterial contraction. And due to that, the radius of the heart increases, the end diastolic volume is getting increases, and problem arises. I hope you all are clear with this particular concept. In next lecture, we will try to explore more. Thank you so much.